everyone, and welcome to Blockchain Professionals Online. This is our April 2020 meetup. We've been social distancing now for at least a month, and the curve seems to be flattening in Australia. That's super positive, but let's keep on washing those hands and doing what we're doing a little bit longer. Welcome everyone tuning into the live stream. Thank you so much for your support. Pop your questions to the live chat on either side here. Just remember, you need to be logged in for the YouTube live chat to work. And there will be a 30-second lag between our Zoom call and the live stream. So it might take a few seconds for us to see your questions coming through. Two quick announcements before I hand over to our guests. Number one, big shout out to our meetup sponsor and the team at Edge Wallet. They have supported our meetup for a long time now. And if you haven't used Edge yet, please try it. They're an awesome OG wallet, multi-currency, non-custodial, and with a big focus on security. In Australia, you can also buy Bitcoin straight from the app, which is kind of cool. They have a partnership with Banksa. Check it out. I'll put the link in the description box after the live stream is finished. And second announcement, I'm very pleased to let you all know that Blockchain Professionals has partnered with Global SOS Hackathon, which is in line with the theme of tonight. Crypto Chicks and DAO Hack are collaborating to produce a huge online hack event open to all countries, all genders, all technologies and philosophies. So the official hack starts on May 29th, but there are loads of pre-hackathon activities already happening, and those activities will count for how we are going to vote in the end. So head on to soshackathon.com to find out more and register. I will also add a link to the description after this. All right, today's guests are two amazing professionals, Leah Callon-Butler and Rob Allen, and they are here to share with us social impact initiatives that they had been working on pre-pandemic and now post-pandemic, and what's going on in whatever they are in the world. Rob here and Leah at the Philippines. Hey guys, thank you so much for being here.
Hey Adriana.
Why don't each of you introduce yourselves, and then we jump into the main content. Who wants to go first?
Shall I go first? Hello, everybody. I think most of you around the Sydney scene and maybe the Melbourne and Adelaide scenes know me. I'm Rob Allen. I've been working in financial services in particular for a long time, and then got the epiphany conversion to blockchain maybe 6 years ago when I started working for one of the banks that I was on the Corda working group. I came to Australia, got the bug 5 years ago, and I set up PwC's Fintech practice. And in doing that, we built our own blockchain platform, which some of you will have heard of. In that same time frame, and being a financial services guy and value aligned with kind of social impact, I started researching a book which subsequently got published to do with financial inclusion and banking the unbanked using emerging tech. Blockchain being my love at that point, and still is. It kind of took quite a large part of that book, and having kind of completed it, I wanted to walk the walk. So left PwC and set up Nodal, which is my consultancy, and we looked specifically at SDG related use cases. So sustainable development goals, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's renewable energy, financial inclusion, marine plastic, carbon abatement. That's kind of in our bailiwick. And as you can imagine, there are plenty of blockchain use cases. So I've had some real fun for the last few years. We've built a rural village savings and lending association platform for Care International in Niger in Africa. I may talk a little bit about that later on the Stellar blockchain. I've designed security tokens for impact investment funds. I've done a lot of work in digital identity. I wrote the Fintech strategy for the South Pacific for ADB and numerous other things. So more consultancy than startup, but I've been working with some startups as well in terms of advisory and mentoring, and that's one of my passions now, is kind of encouraging the entrepreneurial ecosystem here to grow. And I think, as we'll get into later, in a post-pandemic world, there's a huge opportunity for startups. So my personal focus at the moment, as I said, I'm working on a big digital identity program with a financial services organization that want to spin that out and build infrastructure for Australia, which is really good. And we can talk about some of the social impact aspects of that, some of the government use cases, some of the self-sovereign identity aspects of interoperability with it, which would be really cool. And my other passion is wine. So cheers, Adriana. I'm working on a wine supply chain platform for South Australian wine out of Clare Valley, which is a really cool project and the perfect use case for blockchain. So that's verifying the process to prove that under the label integrity program for Wine Australia, that what you say on your label is what you're actually drinking. And
for example, organic.
It's organic, biodynamic, and it's 85% Shiraz if it says it is. So again, blockchain and data provenance and verifiable data is a really good blockchain use case. So I'm busy, and I talk a lot. So I'll pause now and let Leah tell us what she's doing.
I'm over here being jealous of you guys with your wine. Because I'm in the Philippines. I've lived here since August 2018. Currently, we're under enhanced community quarantine, which is obviously a result of the pandemic. But part of that is that we have a local liquor ban. So I think we're into week 5 now, where you haven't been able to buy alcohol anywhere. I am surviving just. But yeah, I think it's really mean that you guys are talking about your wine. But back to blockchain. This is a really special, online meetup for me, because I never thought that I would be Rob's peer, sitting here having a discussion with him. He's been my longtime mentor and one of the very kind people who was very, very generous with his time and patience when I met him very early on in my journey. It was actually, I guess, my moment down the rabbit hole. I was introduced to blockchain by PK Rassam, who some of you in Melbourne might know. I actually started my career in the renewable energy industry and loved my work there, but left kind of in a huff, threw my hands up in the air and said, this industry it's too early stage, all the incentives are wrong, and I don't really see how it can progress until the power dynamics shift, pun fully intended. And I was having this rant with PK, and he sent me a link to the case study about the Brooklyn microgrid, which was an early consensus project, consensus with a Y, where it was the first time they proved energy peer-to-peer trading on the blockchain. And this really, it really caught my imagination. I was so excited by this tech and felt that it really had the power to potentially change the way the entire world worked and put the power back in the hands of the people. So without going too much into that, because I could kind of talk about that particular use case for sustainability on the blockchain all day, then I sort of moved on and stumbled across some conversations around financial inclusion. And I guess, growing up in Australia, sometimes it can actually be quite difficult to grasp how the rest of the world struggles with some of the most basic financial services. But I started to learn about that. And that was when I met Rob. It was actually an Andreas Antonopoulos was in Australia, and I think we bumped into each other getting pizza and just started chatting. And, you know, I think I said something nervously, like, you know, to this random guy that I'd never met before. I said, oh, I know everyone's like really interested in the price of Bitcoin, but I'm sort of interested like how it can be used for good, and, you know, how it could be a tool for social impact, how it could, you know, help people participate in the mainstream financial system who are currently excluded. And I think Rob was just like, yeah, cool, we're going to have some conversations. This is going to be great. So
it's perfect that you and Rob are here together at this meetup. This is not a coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's how we met. And I'm 1,000 times grateful because, you know, when someone's starting out on their blockchain journey, there's a lot to learn. And, you know, you ask a lot of very mundane, boring questions that for someone like Rob, who's worked in the space for a really long time, you know, to spend that time with someone who's just starting out and, you know, I guess field all of their crazy questions is a very good thing to do. So I like to tell that story because I think it's important that other people who have moved further down their blockchain career, they do take the time to help people along the journey as well. Otherwise, we're never really going to see mass adoption of this tech. So thank you, Rob. But yeah, since then, I was lucky to have the opportunity to move full-time into the industry. And it's always been financial inclusion that has inspired me from then on, since sort of 2017. And one of the use cases that I'm most interested in is how do we look at marginalized communities who are unable to access basic financial services and empower them to be able to be part of that system. So I actually moved to the Philippines in August 2018. We had a team of software developers over here that were working on building a crypto payments gateway. And we'd been outsourcing to that team for about 2 years, but we decided to come over and spend a month intensive with them because they were really keen to actually take on a lot more challenging projects. They wanted to work on the design of our decentralized reputation system. They wanted to start writing smart contracts. And even though they didn't really have direct experience in that area, they were not short on passion and enthusiasm and commitment. So we thought, you know what, stuff it, let's go to the Philippines, spend some time intensive with our team and see what happens. So I never left. And it's actually been an amazing journey because when I first got to the Philippines, it was my first time here. I really didn't know a lot about the place, despite having a lot of Filipino friends in Australia. But for someone who's interested in the topic of financial inclusion, it's a pretty great place to be to understand how blockchain and other emerging tech could really transform people's lives. So just to put it quickly into perspective, we've got 109 million people over here. Only 22% of Filipino adults actually have a bank account. You're twice as likely to have a mobile phone than you are a bank account. So people are tech savvy, they've got mobiles, they're online. Another thing, we might touch on Libra later, but of all the people who have access to the internet here in the Philippines, which is about 2/3 of the population, 97% of them are on Facebook. And the population is also very young. So 30% of that massive population are below 15 years old. So it's kind of this really interesting pressure cooker where you've got a young tech savvy population who have access to the internet, they're mobile first, they're digital native, but they don't have bank accounts. And it's really interesting because we're starting to see some great crypto startups that are taking off. People might have heard of things like coins.ph or Rebit, which is remittances meets Bitcoin, remittances. That was created by Satoshi Citadel Industries over here in 2014. And they're quite a successful startup as well. But it's taking all of these financial needs that haven't been met by the incumbent system, adding blockchain and really solving some super deep pain points for the people over here. So I'll leave it there, but it kind of gives you a bit of an idea about why I've chosen to make my life here, because it's a very different place to be. I'm also not in the city. I'm not in Manila. I live in the rural Philippines. And every single day I interface with people who don't have bank accounts and struggle with some of the most basic things like just sending and receiving money and paying for stuff.
That's pretty cool. Rob, I know you have heaps of things to talk about, and I don't know if my question is already included in your chat, but how do people choose a blockchain to lead their social impact project? Are there blockchains that are better than others? How have you defined that?
Oh, thank you. So you asked me the religious war question up front. Thank you for that.
No. I mean, I'm totally agnostic, as you know.
I know you are.
All blockchain, but I do think that this is a good starting point because there are wars out there, and we must address them, I think.
So yeah, let's get it out there. So I'm an engineer. Okay, first and foremost, I believe in using the right tool for the job. I am agnostic as well. I've worked with maybe 5 of the blockchains and 2 other distributed ledgers, which I actually prefer in many ways. So what's the problem you're trying to solve? I don't believe, I'm not a maximalist, and I'll get that out there. I'm kind of a pragmatic decentralist. Okay, so I believe in decentralism. I believe in removing intermediaries within systems that don't add value. I believe that trust at a decentralized level actually improves pretty much every system, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. So if you need a system that scales to hundreds of thousands of transactions a second, you're not going to pick certain proof of work blockchains. I mean, it's never going to happen. The trilemma is going to prevent you, which will lead you to a layer 2 solution or some other kind of clunky, kludgy add-on, I suspect. If you're an enterprise, and I work mainly with enterprise, then maybe you're happy with a private enterprise style blockchain, a Hyperledger or a Corda. And I actually love Corda technology, and Hyperledger is great. I'm a Hedera fan as well, because I think Hedera Hashgraph actually solves lots of problems that blockchains don't, but I see it as infrastructure and not blockchain, although it uses lots of the same words. So it's a horses for courses thing. I'm increasingly frustrated with the Ether price and the speed of Ethereum. I'm hoping that Casper and Ethereum 2.0 will solve all those things, because adoption is massive. And I think it's brought a lot of people to blockchain technology that wouldn't otherwise have come. But what about integrating micropayments with Internet of Things devices and changing the world that way? I'm not going to choose Ethereum to do that. So, I want to do that. I want IoT everywhere, and I want my autonomous vehicle paying your autonomous vehicle a fraction of a cent to overtake. I want all of those use cases to be apparent in our lives. So, blockchain version 1 and 1.5 probably won't cut it. And why should it? Why should a technology that's over 10 years old actually be the one that we stay with forever when everything else is evolving so quickly? And I know there are, except for us. Well,
no, for cars.
Oh no, the cars.
Car technology forever.
Yeah,
I should change that.
I'm watching Altered Carbon on Netflix at the moment. I'm loving that, and I'm kind of applying lots of blockchainy things to their little stacks that they put in their necks. But that's by the by. I selected Stellar for the Niger project. Why did I select Stellar? Well, first and foremost, we were value aligned. I mean, Jed McCaleb, set up Stellar to be a financial inclusion type blockchain, and so we got lots of help from the community and the development community and the foundation because of the things that we wanted to do with it, and that was building rural village kind of digital community banks that those very visceral groups of mainly ladies coming together to save their $1 a day in order to withstand the little impacts of life, which they had no discipline around savings, and they had no ability to access bank accounts in order to save that money. And let's face it, most of the men of the village weren't trustworthy enough to be given the money, because it disappeared very quickly. So the kind of Grameen Bank model has been around for 30 odd years. It's been a mainstay of pretty much every developing country in 100 different ways. And many of the organizations, the NGOs that service different developing countries, have their variant of this model. We worked with Care International. Their version was VSLA, the Village Savings and Loans Association. But it required a lot of resources, boots on ground. It's people in remote countries, remote areas, often carrying cash. You know, it's very risky, it's very dangerous. And when I was doing the fintech strategy for the South Pacific, I saw this in every single country, and every single one of the island nations has its own version of that. And they've got even more challenging problems, in that they're a lot more distributed. They're a lot more difficult to kind of reach, and the banks don't, you know, where they even exist in an island nation, don't actually get outside the main, you know, cities, which are just, you know, towns. So you get situations where public employees like teachers are paid into bank accounts by the government, but the bank branch is maybe 2 days travel away from where they are. And they have to get a boat, and they have to get you know, some kind of other transport to island hop to the main island where they can draw their cash in order to live, and then they have to go back again. And this creates risk that we don't understand in our lives, in our developed world lives. You know, this is what, so I've got to travel the best part of a week to collect my salary, and then I can't earn money while I'm doing that. You build all sorts of new things into your life to do that. And then unfortunately, you know, in the Solomon Islands, 3 years ago, I think, a boat capsized. It killed 6 teachers that were going to collect their salary in this way. They had collectively over 100 years of experience teaching those villages. So you have this terrible loss of life as well. So these are big problems, and it doesn't really matter whether you're in Africa or in the South Pacific or in the Philippines, Indonesia. You know, there are challenges that technology can overcome. Of course, there's infrastructure that needs to be in place. You know, you need the undersea cables, you need satellite bandwidth, you need mobile phones to be affordable enough to be in people's hands. You need. I'm not suggesting you need Facebook, and I certainly don't think you need Libra. But we can come to that if we get to it.
You also need merchants to be using the technology, right? Because in the village, I assume that if everybody's using cash, that's because the merchants also use cash. So
yeah, absolutely, and they're very cash consumptive societies. So, but the thing what we did in Niger was actually to, as the first phase, create a digital kind of shadow of their ledger keeping. You know, so basically we could demonstrate the discipline. You really need to change ways of thinking, and it's a long journey. A lot of tech companies and tech startups think they can parachute their world-saving technology into these communities, and they'll instantly change. And it doesn't work like that. You really need to partner with people who understand the community, understand the culture. The technology we brought to bear in Niger was very much the same as we were talking to coastal communities in Honduras about, because we were building it into their fish capture app, because fishing was their kind of source of income, and the amount of fishing they were doing added to their reputation, which enabled them to kind of draw down on very small microloans. But the whole approach had to be changed for that. So there's this cultural awareness you need in order to, before you even think about delivering technology. So we often fall into this kind of way of thinking that, you know, blockchain will solve all the world's problems, but you've got to actually understand the problem first, and it's not what I think sitting in, you know, a nice suburb of Sydney. So you've got to get in there and understand it, and you know, as engineers and systems developers, we know that we need to get in front of the customer and work with them to fully understand what their requirements are. But you often forget about that, especially when it's a bit more distant and difficult to reach. And then, and only then, can you decide what flavor or color of blockchain that you're going to apply. And of course, you can select ones that have, you know, the best adoption and the best number of developers working on it, and, you know, the lowest gas fees, or, you know, whatever. But those shouldn't be the driving forces of which blockchain or distributed ledger you choose.
Great. I
Pause.
think, yes. Leah, how about you? What have you been experiencing there that could translate to, you know, social impact projects, and how I mean, that there's been some uptake in the Philippines, as you mentioned. Is there anything that just focused on the pandemic? How is it working?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this today, actually, because from the perspective of financial inclusion, I really think what the pandemic has done has just really highlighted a lot of weaknesses in the existing system. So over here, it is a very poor country. 1 in 5, almost 1 in 5 still live below the poverty line. And it's a cash-based society. So I think nationally, the stat is only 4% of transactions happen online, and it's as low as, say, 1% once you get into the provincial areas. So cash is really, really important part of society. And another thing that's really important is remittances. So there was a World Bank report just recently that said that the current stat is about 10% of all of the Philippines' GDP is actually remittances coming into the country. And it's really baked into Filipino culture. You know, you send money home to family. And there's a lot of vulnerable households that really rely on that money coming in. There's not necessarily, a lot of people are forced to go and work overseas because there's a lack of employment options here, or, you know, they can just earn more money overseas. And it's part of the experience of doing that you send money home to family. So what's happened is now that we've been under lockdown for, I think we're just going into week 7 now of enhanced community quarantine. There's a lot of remittances that go on here. There's plenty of problems with them. If you're using the traditional network, it's expensive. You know, it can cost around sort of 10%, which is well above the global average for the cost of actually sending those remittances and paying the transaction fees. 10% is a lot to take out of the cash that you're sending home. It's slow, it's clunky, and the ultimate goal is still to get the cash out. So someone will send money digitally to you, or, you know, through a payments provider, but you've got to go somewhere physically to get that cash. Now, there are a lot of blockchain solutions over here that have started to address that problem. So Rebit, who I mentioned before, is one of them, Coins.ph, BloomX. What they're doing is using blockchain to be able to transfer that money from overseas, and they can do it faster and cheaper. However, because the Philippines is still so cash-based, people still need to be able to get that money out. You know, they're not receiving that money into a digital online bank account or into a digital app. Or even if they do, say if they've got, like, Cebuana is one of the biggest pawn shops over here, where you would go in and, you know, pawn jewelry or something like that to get cash out. They also act as an off-ramps to go the last mile to help people get their cash out. So you still have to go there and get that money out if it's going to be of any use to you, because a lot of merchants, as you said, they don't even accept digital payments, let alone Bitcoin. So the pandemic has exposed that network, I think, because what's happened is you've got a lot of this on-off ramps network. So that could be anything like your local 7-Eleven, the pawn shops, as I mentioned, the SM malls, sometimes even banks. But they're all physical locations. And some of them have reduced operating hours, even though they're classed as essential services. Some of them have shut down just because they're not getting as many customers, or, you know, perhaps their staff don't want to come to work because they're worried about transmission of the virus. But also other things, we've got vehicle checkpoints. So in some cases, people haven't been able to get out of their local suburb to get to the next suburb, to go to the physical shop to get the cash out. So it's really causing a lot of problems and demonstrating that, you know, as much as we've got this digital infrastructure around to help move money around, the actual consumer economy isn't digital yet. So it's interesting because, like, a lot of conversations are happening now around will COVID-19 cause everyone to actually start getting used to doing these digital payments? It's interesting because, I mean, you still, for a lot of people, you still need that on-off ramps, the on-ramps piece where people can actually get cash into their account in the first place. So there's a lot of problems. I guess it's a bit of a chicken and an egg type thing. There's also, sorry, I actually just wrote an article about this in CoinDesk, because let's just say, like, put all of that aside, what I just said, if people can actually get to the shop, they still don't really necessarily want to stand in a line and wait for their cash with other people. And I actually did a personal experiment to see what this would be like, and I had to wait for an hour to get 500 pesos out that my friend sent me. I went to the pawn shop to do this, and it was only about $10. So, you know, I can't imagine anyone in Australia waiting in line for like over an hour to get $10 out of a shop, but that's life for people here. And sometimes if you're in a vulnerable household and you've got no income because you can't work due to the lockdown, the only money that you can possibly get your hands on is what someone sent to you through a remittance network that you've got to go and pick up physically. So that was just kind of a really roundabout way to try and explain it, you know, a bit like what Rob was trying to describe, that the situation over here is very, very different for a lot of people. I guess also, just to put it into perspective, where I live, it's a service-based economy. Most people are working in jobs that service the tourist industry. So you've got a lot of people who work in the hotels, the restaurants, the pubs, they drive the trikes or the jeepneys, which are our local transport. And since the lockdown, all of those people have been out of work. So they've got no income. And the next issue to consider is the government has said that they will deliver relief payments, but how do they get them to them? Again, they're cash payments. So there's not necessarily these systems there that are already set up to be able to send people money digitally, quickly, efficiently, cheaply. It's just not there yet. So in terms of, you know, what Rob was talking about in saying, like, how do we look at this pandemic and look at ways that we can actually create new solutions that will benefit the world post-pandemic? There's a lot of opportunity there. And I think for me, I'm really kind of looking at this on-off ramp system. Like, how do we make it more efficient to either get money in and out of the system? And then, you know, as a pipe dream, how do we get Filipinos to start using digital transactions as opposed to relying so much on cash? And, you know, that's a whole other conversation in terms of why cash is so important in the Philippines. And you kind of have to go dig into history for that. But yeah, I mean, that's just a little bit of what I'm experiencing over here, and seeing how there's some flaws in the network that we need to kind of pinpoint on to make the whole thing more efficient.
But well, you mentioned before that 97% of people who have a smartphone are on Facebook. So maybe that's one of the places where Libra is going to play a big part in, you know.
Are we going to go there, Rob? Are we going to go there?
I'm very, very happy to go toe-to-toe on Libra.
We actually have a question about that. So Jess Oswald, co-organizer, hi Jess, he asks, would love to hear your thoughts on Libra and whether you think it's a feasible solution for unbanked populations, particularly where internet infrastructure is poor.
Cool. Well, okay, so there are two things, I guess, there. If internet infrastructure is poor and connectivity is poor, then it doesn't solve the solution. I mean, we've had this. Sorry, go on.
didn't Facebook have something about putting the internet everywhere? With
Oh, of course, yes. I mean, as I said earlier, there are infrastructural assumptions that one has to make.
Yeah,
you know, Starlink's going to cover the world anyway, so and then Skynet becomes self-aware, and then it's game over. So Libra for me is a stalking horse. I think it'll happen. I think this is about CBDCs. This isn't about Facebook and Libra. This is, do some governments get to issue digital currencies? What does that mean for citizens? And if those governments are totalitarian with expansive regional policies, how do the capitalist and westernized governments respond? Well, I'm not going to name any. It's quite obvious. So something like Libra, which is corporate coin. I mean, everyone here must have watched Mr. Robot. I mean, this is Evil Corp, right? Issuing digital dollars versus the what the Chinese did in that show, in terms of taking over Bitcoin. So this is playing out in live here. The conspiracy theories about the removal of cash because of viruses and COVID and everything, aren't far from the mark, and I suspect these will be the sources of
but the removal
new Netflix shows for years to come.
The removal of cash would only be applicable to the Western developed societies, as we just saw in the Philippines. 99% of the population still use cash, so I think they have a much longer time frame to be, to have that freedom of privacy.
No, 97% of the population have mobile phone technology and
use cash.
And use cash because there's no alternative.
Only 4% of online transactions, right? Was that what you said, Leah?
Yeah, so I think this is the really interesting thing. So just to preface this, obviously, Rob and I share a lot of the same thoughts about social impact and how technology can be used for good or bad. And I think there is a whole conversation to be had around businesses that target bottom of the pyramid models and whether their motivations are positive or negative. So you could look at something like Grameen Bank or even M-Pesa, for-profit models that look at the poorest of the poor in the population, and they deliver empowering products. But sometimes there's a fine line between empowering and exploitative. And I think that's where people really want to pick apart Libra, and probably more accurately, Facebook, because they're very concerned around everything from privacy breaches through to exploitation of fake news and issues like that. But if you put all of that aside and just look at the fact, just ask the question, would people actually use Libra? Would this create benefit in their lives? Would they move over to it? And it's been something I've been thinking about a lot, because as I just mentioned, people are not used to doing digital payments here. For example, e-commerce is an industry that is growing rapidly over here, but people still don't pay for stuff online. Lazada and Shopee are our big Amazons. People pay cash on delivery. It's the same with deliveries of food, or even things like Grab, which is our Uber. If you're in Metro Manila, people do digital payments a lot there, but where I live out in the rural areas, people still pay by cash. So it's super fascinating that you've actually got this online ecosystem that is developing and flourishing, but cash hasn't caught up. And I think a lot of it, this is just my personal take on it, but I think a lot of it is the fact that people aren't banked. So it's not easy for them to just link their credit card or link their debit card to the system because they don't have one. However, with Libra, it is important to make a distinction that Libra and Facebook are two different things. They're fairly synonymous, but they are two different things. So we shouldn't just assume that, Facebook could Libra could instantly convert all Facebook users into Libra users. And let's be honest, like Facebook has launched some other products that have been total flops, like Facebook Workplace, and the dating thing hasn't really taken off. So who knows, like maybe Libra would just be another flop. But assuming that it does take off, I think somewhere like the Philippines, people would actually use it. And the reason is I think it's brilliant how they're marketing it, because the problem with fintechs over here is that, yes, financial technology could really improve people's lives. But the biggest problem with actually developing, launching a product and getting users is that you're trying to change their behavior. The change effort is too big. And no matter how awesome this new product is, people are sticky. Like they don't want to change what they're doing. They don't want to learn something new. They're creatures of habit. The difference with Libra is, you know, their whole marketing thing is it should be as easy to send money as it is to send a photo. And an interesting stat is there's an annual report done by Hootsuite and We Are Social every year. And for 5 years running, Filipinos have been the #1 most active, most engaged social media users in the world, by far. So they spend over 10 hours online a day, and at least 4 hours of that, or close to four hours of that, is dedicated to social media. A lot of people say that's because they're also spending like 4 hours in traffic a day, which is also true. But whatever the reason is, people are glued to their phones and using Facebook every day. The other thing is too, and like this is something that I'm not an expert on, so I don't really want to kind of go into it too much. And also I'm not Filipino, so I haven't experienced this myself. But in the Philippines, I think there's also a bit of institutional distrust. People aren't necessarily as trusting of banks and government as they would be of their family, you know. And you've got to think about Facebook as a platform. And again, there's ethical considerations and a whole debate that you could have around this. It's kind of ironic to think that Facebook is more trustworthy because it's the place where your family and friends reside. But if you think about like the actual process that someone has to go through to send a digital payment to their mum, to their dad, which is something that Filipinos do all the time, does it feel more natural to do it from within Facebook Messenger, Calibra, whatever it is in the end, and you look at, you know, your friends list and you just drop down, you pick them and you send some money, as opposed to having to go and get a whole different app and learn a whole different thing and, you know, completely change your behavior. So a lot of it, I think, is just that, you know, Facebook Workplace and Facebook Dating was a bit of a sidestep to what Facebook really is at its core and how it delivers value. But Filipinos love Facebook. It's a big part of their life. It's the way that they keep in touch with their family and friends. And I think with Facebook coming in, like why we should not be, I've kind of seen that in crypto circles now, it's kind of cool to slag it off. And it's like, oh, look, you know, under regulatory pressure, now they've just, you know, muzzled their plans and it's just another PayPal. But I actually think, given that they are focused on emerging markets, they're focused on issuing these kind of like pseudo CBDCs for banks and governments that don't have the means to be able to develop their own. This is where things could get really, really interesting, because they're targeting a market and they understand these deep, deep, deep pain points with high friction payments. And they're seeing a user base that has a high need for it. Like, you know, people in Australia, we're not constantly sending money around the world unless you run a global business. But for consumers in the Philippines, global remittances, sending money to family and friends, is a part of everyday life. So whether it's good or bad, I just think that if they were to introduce it, if the BSP was to airdrop Libra pesos to, you know, the 79 million or whatever Facebook users there are in the Philippines, I think it would have a high chance of taking off.
So what would the Filipino president then do? It may be that Filipinos love Facebook, but he's proven himself not to be particularly libertarian. So you know, the consequences could be quite dramatic, and you can't really say regulation, you know, put to one side, let the people decide, because the real world doesn't really work like that. I mean, it's a stable coin, you know, and they've committed. We shouldn't talk about Facebook because constitutionally they're set up very much apart. So Libra 2 is very different now from what it was when they first came out 18 months or so ago. You know, you know, they're based in Switzerland. They've gone for Swiss financial services licensing. They've got a governing council, which they've stolen from another project. They're doing lots of things which are doing it the right way, and it's a stable coin. As long as they can demonstrate that they have the reserves to back the issued tokens, then, you know, the technology works. We've had stable coins for years. I just think that the impact in some parts of the world may have consequences that we don't fully understand, and that there are, you know, governments should be in control of their own monetary policy, and this kind of undermines a lot of that.
Steve has commented on the chat that Libra 2.0 might be a palatable mechanism for sovereign governments to hedge their CBDCs.
I agree with Steve.
For the time being.
I agree with Steve. But, you know, any large fund in the billions, let's say, or more than that, and there are plenty of them, could do the same, sure, and offer that service to governments. So I think we're entering an entirely new world. I mean, China's leading the way here, and there has to be a response. And I wasn't being flippant about Mr. Robot. I think there will be a kind of capitalist response, which is based out of some kind of big corporate approach to doing the same thing. But remember, I mean, Facebook and Facebook users are in the order of billions. What technology would support that kind of level of transactioning right now, without kind of sharding down to the kind of national level or however they want to do it? I haven't read the white paper for Libra 2, so I don't know how they plan to do that, but it's interesting, very interesting. Can we move on? We're running out of time. I don't want to spend all the time.
Just Leah, someone asked, James Bedwell asked, what is the biggest barrier for the people, I guess, in the Philippines to get a bank account?
Oh, awesome question. So I think there's two parts to this. Firstly, it's purely that, okay, so the Philippines is an archipelago of more than 7,400 islands. So firstly, people are really distributed. The further away you go from Metro Manila, generally the higher levels of poverty. So you get people who are out in these extremely remote places where firstly, there's often just not a bank. And because the banking system is still so based on bricks and mortar, if you can't get to a bank, well, you can't open a bank account. Obviously, that's really slowly beginning to change with things like mobile banking and open banking, but here it's years behind what it is like in the Western world. But that's part of it. Another part is ID, KYC. A lot of people don't have the right identity documents, so that can be a huge barrier. A lot of people just don't earn enough money, so they don't see the need to have a bank account. So, you know, they're living day to day on cash income. So there's not necessarily an inherent need in their eyes to actually have a bank account because perhaps they don't have anything to really put away or save or use or send. But the other thing is too, I think, trust. There's a real issue with not wanting to give up your tangible money over to this institution that you don't necessarily trust. So I think that is definitely a symptom of what's happened here in terms of politics in decades gone by. And it's certainly something that probably rings true more with older generations than younger generations. But yeah, there's a number of things that fit into this. Just as a side point, there's a really interesting project over here that a lot of people may have heard of. It's called Eye2Eye by Union Bank of the Philippines. And what they did was actually use blockchain to connect all of the rural banks of the Philippines to the main banking system. And this was super important for a couple of reasons. Obvious stuff is that they're able to process transactions a lot faster. They're able to settle transactions a lot quicker, but it's also cheaper. But the other piece is too that because a lot of people are moving away, millennials are moving away from the rural areas and there's less customers in those rural places, the number of rural banks has been falling for a really long time. So I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was, there used to be something like 1,400 rural banks across the Philippines, and now it's down to only around 400, which makes it even more difficult or less likely for people who are living in those rural areas to be able to get to a bank. So if you can actually start connecting that rural bank network to the mainstream network, there's a greater chance of being able to affect inclusion for people no matter where you live across this sprawling archipelago. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, but I think things are changing with younger generations, and obviously now we have mobile first tech that is helping change things a lot. But yeah, there's a lot in there really to unpack.
So Rob, what have you seen lately in Australia to address the COVID stuff?
Glad you asked that, because I was about to say, can we talk about Australia?
Yes.
And not because, you know, there's a kind of a trite kind of compare and contrast between developed and developing, but I think, you know, after 3 close waves of crises here, if you consider the drought followed by the bushfires followed by now COVID, these kind of repeated waves of impact are hitting very similar people, again, rural communities. The distribution of benefits, distribution of payments, proof of identity when you've lost everything. I mean, these are all very similar problems to the ones that Leah was saying, and we may not like to think of it like that, but actually those in society who are disadvantaged, either through where they live or because of climate impact or pandemics, they're still people and they're still impacted, and we still as a society need to support and help them. So, I mean, there are 2 things. I mean, we all, I guess, know the use cases around distribution of benefits, and this ties into CBDCs as well, but how we enable the flow of programmable money through a system. And I think something like that, if never before, and after 11 years of having this tech with us, if never before, this should prove to us that we need to do something about it. So, governments do need to step up. State governments here, I know some of them, the more forward-thinking ones, are actively looking at how we may do this, but the infrastructure is not there. So we could right now be ensuring that, given a certain digital identity of a citizen is verified, they could receive these stimulus payments. But we have nothing like that. We've got a really clunky, 1990s way of distributing funds. I guess the government are really scared of fraud, because fraud will be rife in this, between all the different stimulus packages. So we should be there, but we're not. And I think it's a real shame, because we've had enough warning. There's been enough flags along the way, and this won't be the last one. So it's a wake-up call. I'm really focused now on post-pandemic world, because a lot of commentators are saying, I believe it, we're not going back to the way we were. We have to have this painful period, sustained painful period, to prove to us that there is a better way. Entrepreneurs in Australia have a huge opportunity now to nudge that and continue to kind of nudge that in a way that is far more decentralized. Why should we go into the office when we love being at home with our families, of course, all the time? But there is a balance there to be struck, and I think companies will look very closely at their rental bills of big CBD offices when all their workers actually like working from home, or are used to Zoom. So all these things are changing. I think we as a community, as an ecosystem, whether we be in Australia or in the Philippines, whether we're kind of working on digital identity projects or remittance projects, or just other blockchain and DLT projects, we have a duty now really to really push this agenda, because this is the tipping point. The GFC wasn't the tipping point. It could have been, but it wasn't. And it was all about the banks. This is about everyone, and it's everywhere. I mean, Australia sailed through the GFC with barely a scratch. I think more by luck than judgment, but it happened. The now we are all affected. So we should all do something. We have a national blockchain roadmap. The national blockchain roadmap, which you know very well, Adriana, sets 3 key opportunities for the sectoral opportunities for the country in terms of KYC portability, in terms of credentialing, and in terms of supply chain. Now, identity we've talked about ad nauseum, not ad nauseum, but a lot in this this last hour. I think digital identity is the core and fundamental part of the solution to all of these problems. Get digital identity right. I don't care whether it's federated, I don't care whether it's self-sovereign. I think there's a journey there, there's a spectrum. So we need to get that right. We need to get it, the government and the DTA and TDIF and consumer data rights and Trust ID out of the Payments Council, all kind of interoperable. That's what I'm working on, actually. So interoperability is key. No walled gardens. Solve digital identity, then all these other use cases will occur. Supply chain, sectoral opportunity in wine. Refocus that. We're talking about the contraction of global supply chains in a post-pandemic world. We don't want to be reliant on these kind of global corporates. We want to do more of it at home. So supply chain refocusing is an opportunity for entrepreneurs to reapply their technology, and it changes the networks. It changes the kind of the graphs that you look at when you're looking at supply chains. Perfect, absolutely perfect for this community. And then, the credentials and the KYC portability, open banking is coming. We should all embrace open banking and push that along. The banks have delayed for too long opening up their APIs and enabling the flow of entrepreneurialism and innovation using the banks. The banks shouldn't be at the heart of the economy. They should be service providers at the edge. And so that's what I think we should be doing. And emerging tech, whether it be DLT or IoT or AI or all the other great things that the world's finest minds are bringing to bear, need to be applied right now. That's my pitch.
There's a question for you, Rob. Mr. Cherry Sunburst asks, Rob, what role do you think? Yes, what role do you think the trusted digital identity framework should play in digital identity in Australia? And would you classify that model as self-sovereign? Good question.
Yeah, so the question is the Trust ID framework. So Trust ID is a federated model. It's a framework that's come out of the financial services industry, sponsored by the Payments Council and overseen by the RBA. So let's put it into its context first and foremost. But as a federated framework, it has interoperability at its heart. So self-sovereign and federated don't normally wed together very nicely. But if you imagine different models of interoperability where you might have a bridge or some kind of broker that actually understands both, and in Trust ID parlance, you've got identity service providers, which kind of are your wallet, and that might be your bank in a federated model. But I might self-assert, so I might have it in my own wallet in a self-sovereign way. Now that might be a proof level that's sufficient for the use cases that I'm using it within, or there may be other relying parties that want it to be kind of bank approved. So you've got a different proof level. So we're still working through that, but I've got some very genius-like self-sovereign advocates that we're looking at to try and make that work together. I think it's a journey. And we're kind of moving together, but you need to get the top end of town involved as well. So you need, the identity providers like the banks or Aussie Post or the government that still hold our attributes. We're not going to take them away from them straight away. So it's a journey, and we collaborate and we allow competition to occur in a free market. And within certain rules or within a framework, and then we hopefully get where we need to go.
I have a feeling that digital identity will be in the national blockchain roadmap horizon very soon, after everything is being reviewed since COVID and how we're going to respond to that. So fingers crossed that's going to happen.
So you need identity in place. You need an identity framework in place. So if you're a guy who's lost, or a family who's lost everything in the bushfire, how do you prove you are who you say you are? Presumably you've got your phone, because no one kind of puts it beyond arm's reach, but everything else is gone. You need to be able to attest your identity and verify to a government service in order to receive funds. One of these infrastructures, and it's not TDIF, and it's probably not consumer data rights driven. So we need something like a self-sovereign or a trust ID that will enable that to happen. We've got some fantastic government use cases.
And credentials and KYC are both very big parts of a self-sovereign ID, right?
Absolutely.
So I guess starting with the parts to make the whole might be a good approach for like convincing the people who are still trying to understand this, how it works. Not convincing, but showing how it works.
And the credentials in the national blockchain roadmap were more about foreign nationals with educational qualifications that wanted to become medical practitioners in Australia, that kind of thing. But you refocus that into, well, we all have credentials, and the credentials that we attest to as part of our identity, these attributes in context that people talk about as being one's identity, are necessary. So you need to store them somewhere. So where would you store them? Well, somewhere where I can get hold of them at any point in time. Oh, well, that's a great use case for a blockchain.
Absolutely. All right, we are at 6:33 p.m. Let's get some final words of wisdom. So let me quickly go through the chat and see if there's any other questions. Okay. How did they get started with this new thing?
How many people do we have? Do you know?
Let me see.
Mr. Cherry Sunburst.
Again, we have about 15.
Cool.
Nice. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah, lots of.
I'd be buying beers for that many if they were if we were together.
Yeah,
sure.
That's the one downside. We don't have the go to the pub afterwards, right? Damn it.
Save it for when we're all together again.
Brenda Semplick there. We have Jess Gilbert. Who else is there? Lucy Lynn is there. James Bedwell's there. Enzo Might. Oh, so many people that I don't know who they are because they have crazy names like Mr. Cherry Sunburst.
I love that name.
And Crypto BTC Anarchist. Hello. Thanks for being here.
I'm sure he's a Libra fan.
Sure. Lash Ashmore is saying, next time, Rob, next time you're gonna, pick up the.
I'll pick up the tab next time.
That's it. Maybe let's say blockchain professionals July. Maybe we'll be able to meet in person.
Probably a bit soon, July.
Okay.
Maybe August. Yeah.
We'll see. Soon
After
enough.
the winter.
As soon as we can.
Okay.
Any final words?
As soon as we can get Leah back to Australia from the Philippines.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually meant to be there this week. I was coming back for this meetup, and also my best friend was getting married. So it's going to be obviously a big part of her wedding, but it's all been postponed. So I'm definitely coming back. I mean, let's just wait and see when all the travel bans actually get lifted. But I do look forward to coming back and having a beer or a few with you guys.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Leah and Rob, for today. Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for tuning in and for your questions. If you're watching the recording, I'll put some ways of contacting Leah and Rob in the description, so you can send your post live stream questions directly to them. And stay safe out there, and we'll see you at the next block. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adriana. Thanks, Rob. Bye.
See you, Leah. Bye.